Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. Today is going to be another short one, but a very useful one, I think. We're going to be talking about a HUD, and I'm going to be showing a little bit different way to do it than I've done in the past, and I think this is going to be way better and make things a lot easier for us in the future. Basically, we're going to be creating a HUD class, a separate HUD class. And then I'm also going to show you guys how to use different functions to show and hide it very easily. And you'll be able to call this from basically any blueprint you want. So it'll be really easy to show and hide your HUD from wherever you want. And it'll make things really easy for us in the future. So before we get into it, I just want to thank you all so much for your continued support. And if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to support me even further, you can check out the links below to my Patreon, where I've got early access to the videos. I create assets every month that I give out, and you can get project files, all that kind of stuff. I also have some links to my Fab store that you can get some great assets for your game, and really helps support me as well. So thank you guys so much for that. But let's go ahead and get into this. All right, everyone. So here we are in our little test level for testing everything out. And before we actually get into this, I want to just talk briefly about a little bit of research that I did in just like best practices for creating a HUD, because there's actually a lot of different ways to go about doing this, and there's a lot of different recommendations that people have. And to be honest, I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't know if there is really a right or wrong way to go about this. Like many things in game development and Unreal Engine, there are multiple ways to do things. And I think you kind of have to just figure things out for yourself and what works best for your game. So the method that I'm going to show here is maybe not the best for your game. And this may even be something that I change in the future, but this is just the way that I've been doing it and starting to play around and learn some things. And so that's what I'm trying to share here, is just how I'm doing this right now, and to maybe give you a different perspective and ideas on how to set your own game up. So I will actually link some stuff in the description for the research that I did, just some posts on different forums and Reddit and things like that for other people talking about how they set up a HUD, how they use a HUD class, how some of them don't use a HUD class. There's, again, a lot of different discussions around this. So first of all, the HUD class itself. So if we go over to the world settings here, and if you don't see the world settings, or if you don't have your world settings, you can go up here to Window and then go down to World Settings, and then that will just give you this window here. And I like to have this window just normally in my editor by default, because it gives me access to a few different things, which are very nice, mainly being the game mode override here. And by default, you will probably have something like the third person game mode, or it might even say none here, or it might say first person. Whatever game mode you're using will be here, and you can actually create a custom game mode. So that's what I would recommend doing. You don't have to do that. You can just override things here, but it's very easy to make a custom game mode, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second. And then lastly, I like to just take this window and just dock it to this area over here next to my details panel, so that I can just switch back and forth there and have easy access to this. So if you don't have a custom game mode and you want to make one, it's very easy. It's just a blueprint class. So you create a blueprint and then just search for game mode. And then you can create a custom game mode here. You can call it whatever you want. I've just created one that I've called GM_test. And then when you open that up here, it's just really a few things that you have access to here. And you can just set various things like your player controller. If you have a custom player controller class, you'll see here that we have a HUD class and your default pawn. So the main things that you're going to want to change here, or really the main thing that you're going to want to set, is to set whatever character you're using. So I've got a character called BP_my_character. You want to set that to be the default pawn class here. And then the other thing that we'll do is we'll create a custom HUD class, and then we can set that here. Now, in my research, I actually found that the HUD class is technically deprecated. but you can still use it. And to be honest, I think it's kind of useful to have. And I mean, they also literally give us access to it here to have a custom HUD class. So again, it's one of those things that, there's kind of some controversy around it. It seems like some people think it's really useful. Some people say, oh, no, you shouldn't use it. And you just kind of have to do your own research and figure out what you want to do. But I think it's useful. So I'm going to show you how I am using it and how I've got it set up. Okay, now to create a HUD, we can actually create that from a blueprint as well. So I'm going to create a new blueprint and we're going to search for HUD and you will see HUD here. Okay, and I'm just going to call that BP my HUD. And before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and set that to be our HUD class here. I'll compile and save, and now we can close our game mode there. All right, so if we open up our HUD here, you'll see that this kind of just looks like a regular blueprint. So there are some custom functions that are built in. If you look under, let's see, under HUD here, we have a bunch of different things here that we could use. You can draw a texture, you can draw text, you can draw materials, triangles, lines, things like that. My understanding is this was used before we really had widgets. I think this actually came from like UE3, so it's been around for a very long time. Now that we have widgets, then this is no longer really used, but you could use these if you want. And I think it's good just to know that you have these things in here. If you just want to render a texture on the screen as like your default HUD, then you can. But really, the way that I think I'm going to use this is more of a container to create all of my widgets and kind of hold all of my widgets in this class. And then I can kind of have easy access to those. And there's some things like, I know in the past we've talked about how to show and hide your HUD. And that's a thing that is going to come up very frequently, right? Where maybe you have a cutscene that's going to play and you want to hide your HUD while the cutscene is playing, and then you want to show it again after it's finished. And, there's so many different ways to go around doing that, but I kind of like this method and I think it's a little bit easier. So what we're going to do here is actually spawn or create our widget for our HUD inside of the HUD class. And then that way we don't have to go on to our character. A lot of times you do it on initialize or like on begin play here, where you will create a widget and then you'll set that as your HUD, and then you'll have a reference to your HUD widget like that and so on. We're going to do basically the same thing, but inside of the HUD class. Now, we need to actually create a widget for our HUD. So let's go to our widgets and let's create a new widget here. So user interface widgets. And I'm just going to call that W_HUD. Okay, we'll open that up. And we'll go ahead and get a canvas panel. Okay, now at this point, this is again where there's so many different ways to do this, right? One of the first things that I pretty much always do, and most everyone does, is you want to have some kind of an aim dot or reticle or cursor on here to show you where you're pointing, right? So you could just go ahead and add an image directly to the canvas here. What I'm going to do is actually create a separate widget, and then I'm going to add the aim dot to that widget, and it's just going to contain that single dot and nothing else. And then I'm going to add that under the canvas panel here. And the reason I'm going to do that is kind of for later on down the road when I want to maybe manipulate that reticle and change things in it. What I want to do is kind of try and create like a layered approach here so that we have different layers to our HUD. So I might create a separate widget for the aim dot. I might have a separate widget for something like our health bar, objectives, things like that. Okay, so I'm also going to create another widget here, and we're going to call that W_aim dot. I'll open that up. And for my canvas panel here, I'll go ahead and drop this on. But I'm going to change this, instead of fill screen, I'm going to change it to custom. And then I'm going to set this to be like 200 by 200. Okay. And then I'll add an image to that. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this. So that will be aim dot. And I'll set my anchor to be centered. And then I'll just zero all of these out. Or well, actually for our size, we want to actually set that for whatever we want the size of our actual aim dot to be. So in this case, I am going to try maybe like 10 by 10. So that's 10 pixels by 10 pixels. And then I want it to be perfectly centered as well. So under the alignment, I'm going to set that to 0.5 and 0.5. So that is right in the center. Now you could just leave it as a box like this. But I've created just a very simple little dot that I created in Photoshop. So I'm just going to grab that and I'll put that in under the brush here, change it like that. Okay. So compile and save, and we can go ahead and close that. Okay, now back in our HUD, let's actually add the aim dot widget that we just created. So we can actually just search for it here, aim dot. We'll see aim dot here, and we can just drag that onto our canvas panel. And now at this point, we can change how we want this to appear on here. So I want this to be always in the center, and I'll reset the X and Y position there. And then the size, we could either set it to 200 by 200 again, which is probably what you want to do. But you could change this, you could have a little bit more control if you wanted it to be, I don't know, slightly larger or bigger. But you probably want to set it to whatever you set your widget to be there. And then again, for the alignment, I'm going to go 0.5 by 0.5. So we are right in the center. And now we have our aim dot is right in the center, and we should be good to go. Now, again, you might be asking why we're doing it this way. This might seem a little trivial or just like a little repetitive to create a widget and then create another widget that we're adding that widget into this widget. But the reason I want to do this is just to keep everything as modular as possible and to try and keep everything kind of separated as much as possible. Because having a single HUD like this will allow us to do a lot of things like, well, now we can just easily turn the visibility on and off for this to hide or bring it back. And then that will just hide everything that is on our HUD. And then I can still have full access to this widget to do specific things with that widget that I want to do. Now, again, this is just a single image, so it's not too crazy, at all. It's really about the most simplest thing that we could do. But when we get into other things that are more complex with having like objectives and inventory and that kind of stuff on the screen, then it's just going to be a little bit easier for us to control everything like this. All right, so at this point, we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and close this. And let's go back to our HUD class that we created, so BP My HUD. And we need to actually create this widget now so that it is shown on our screen. So the way that you might have done this is doing it in your character, where on Initialize, you might go in here and create a widget and then create that widget and then set that as a reference so that you have a reference to that. We're basically going to do the same thing. We're just going to do it in this blueprint here. Okay, so we'll just delete this, and on begin play, well, actually we need to get our player controller and then create widgets. Okay, and then that widget is going to be the HUD, W_HUD. And then I want to go ahead and promote this to a variable so that I can have a reference to our actual HUD widget. So I'll just call this HUD widget ref. And then from here, we will add to viewports. Now we can go ahead and test this. So if we go ahead and play, we can see that our aim dot is now on the screen. And so we know that our HUD is working, and that looks great. All right, so now because we've done it this way, we've kind of kept it off of our character like this, and we don't have to worry about creating it on our character. We just are setting that HUD class up first, and it's adding it to the screen like this. Now, one nice thing about this, or one of the many things that is kind of nice about this, is we can do some other things. Like one of the common things that I struggled with for a while is figuring out the best way to hide my HUD whenever I would need to. Like, if you're going to play a cutscene or something like that, or maybe there's just a specific instance that you don't want your HUD to be visible, or maybe you even want to have a HUD that like fades away when you are at full health, and then it comes back whenever you take damage or something like that. Figuring out the best way to go about that can be not really hard, but just like, okay, what's the best way to do this, right? So what I have been doing and what I like to do is to create a function for displaying and hiding our HUD. Now, we could create a function in our HUD class to show and hide our HUD, but I have started to use the Blueprint function library more and more, and I really like using this, and I'll show you why. So first of all, if you don't know what the Blueprint function library is, it is an actual class that we can create. So like if we right click here and go to Blueprints, you'll see that we have something called Blueprint function library. So you can create that, and I like to create one that I just call BP underscore common functions. And you can see that I have a few in here. And the neat thing about this is we can create functions in here that we can then call from basically anywhere. So think about using this as a way to access things that you might do a lot of times. So for example, you can see that I have get my character here. There's a lot of times that we need to get access to our character. So we get our player character, we cast to our player character, and then we set a reference to our player character, right? And that's perfectly fine. But what I like about doing it this way is I've set up a function that is the same thing there. So we're getting our player character, casting to that, and then just adding the return node with the reference to our cast here. So now from any blueprint that I'm in, so like if I go to my light master that we created here, I can actually just right click and I can say get my character, and you can see that's coming from BP common functions. And so now I just have access to that cast and to my character's variables here. So I can call any variable for my character or any function or anything like that. Now to get it to be like this, you need to do one other thing in your common functions when you create this. And I'll walk through how to create this because we're going to do this with our HUD here. But you need to, on your function, change it to a pure. You don't have to do this, but if we don't do this, if I compile and save, now if I go here and I say get my character, then I still have that function, but we have an input and an output at that point. Whereas with my character, I really only want to access it to get variables from. So I don't actually need the input and output for that. So that's just an option that you can do, and a very useful option that we can choose that. So I can change that to a pure, similar with my game instance here. I do the same thing. So with my game instance, I can just call anywhere get game instance. Now you got to be kind of careful with your naming. I probably should name this something else because get game instance is just a built-in function that you can call. But to get my actual game instance, that is going to be the one under common functions. So again, I should really rename that to make that more clear. But now you can see I have access to my game instance where I can call any variables or anything like that from that. Okay, so if that was a little confusing, let's just go ahead and create some functions here, and I think that will be a little bit easier to understand. First of all, let's create a function to actually get access to our BP my HUD. So let's just create a new function, and I'll just call this get my HUD. Okay, I will go ahead and change this to a pure. And so now we want to just cast to our HUD. So we'll just get our player controller, and then we can say get HUD. And then from there, I can cast to BP my HUD. Okay, and then we can just add a return node here. And then from as BP my HUD, I'll just drag that into here. And then I might want to just rename this something to like my HUD ref. So it's a little bit easier to remember. Go ahead and compile and save. And now we just can very easily call our HUD here if we ever need that. So I can just say get my HUD. Okay, and then I just have access to that HUD class that we created. But we also want to create a function to show and hide our HUD. So let's also create that in our function library. So let's create one just called hide my HUD. And then we'll also create another one called show my HUD. Okay, so for hide my HUD, well, now that we created our get my HUD, I can very quickly just say get my HUD. And then from here, I can get our HUD ref. Okay, so that's the actual widget ref there. And then we can just set the visibility to hidden. Okay, and then we'll just return. Now, in this case, I'm not going to make this one pure because this is an actual function that I want to be able to run, essentially. So in my character, I might want to do something like, let's get the tab key. And we can say when I press tab, we want to hide my HUD. And you can see it's going to show up right there from BP common functions. Okay, now let's do the opposite. So let's go back to common functions. And we can actually just copy this for show my HUD. Paste. And we're going to do the same thing, but we just want to set the visibility to be visible. And then return. Okay, so now if we go back to my player character, I could just do like a flip-flop here. Okay, and I probably won't leave this like this. This is just to kind of demonstrate how this is working. But now we can say show my HUD. Okay, so now when we play, I can hit tab and it should hide our HUD. And then if I hit tab again, it should show the HUD. So let's try that out. Okay, so tab goes away and then tab brings it back. Okay, so as you can probably imagine, that can be very, very useful now. So we can call these two functions from any blueprint we want. So, you know, if we are in, I don't know, let's say like over here on our lights here, if we wanted to, for some reason, I don't really know why we'd want to do this, but when we are working with this lamp, let's get our events interact. And let me just also call the parent here. So we're going to run the interaction event from our BP Light Master. And then here, let's just say that we want to hide my HUD. Okay, so now when I go and play, and I go to interact with this, then you can see that my HUD is now gone. And I can technically bring it back with pressing tab, but that is just kind of an example of how you can use that functionality. So, you know, probably a better way to show that would be like if we had a cutscene and maybe on begin play with our level blueprint, we might want to call hide HUD, and then when the cutscene is finished, we could enable show HUD, or run that function to show HUD. So I'll just go ahead and delete this stuff because I don't want that to actually happen whenever I'm using that. But yeah, I hope that is useful. That's going to be it for today. Just a short little one, but that is going to be very important for a lot of the other stuff that we've got coming up. When we get to a little bit more advanced HUD and more advanced things, like we're going to be adding a place for interaction text, we're going to be adding a health bar, objectives, numbers down here to count ammo and that kind of stuff. That'll be very useful for us. And again, we've got just a single HUD that we can very easily show and hide now. And then we can just add all of these additional elements by creating separate widgets for them and then kind of put that onto our main HUD, if that makes sense. So yeah, I hope you guys found that useful. On the next video, we'll actually be going a little bit more in depth with that and creating interaction text for when we go up to interact with things like our lights or light switches or doors or things like that. We'll be able to display a unique text, and then we'll also be able to change the text depending on the state of something. So the example that I will probably use is with our lamp. So we'll be able to do something like this where when we walk up to it, we'll be able to display text. And then depending on the state of that item, we will change what it says. So here you can see when the light is off, it says turn the light on. When the light is on, it says turn the light off. And it's only going to show up when we're actually looking at that. And so this will be very customizable because you can use this for lots of different things, for doors, puzzles, all kinds of stuff like that. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming up a little bit later. And I hope you guys found that useful, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, take care, guys.